Let's build an extreme gradient boost model in Python to help you better understand how it works. XGBoost turns the abstract idea of learning from mistakes into a concrete training loop, where every part exists to answer 3 practical questions at every step. What is the model currently getting wrong? What is the most useful change we could make next? And how do we make that change without letting the model become unstable or overconfident? Essentially, it works by building an ensemble of decision trees, one after another, where each one is trained to correct the previous mistakes. This is one of the most sought after machine learning models in the data science world, so let me break it down for you in a way that really anyone can understand. The process begins by choosing a loss function, which is a process that converts the gap between a model's prediction and the true label into a single penalty number. The idea of training the model becomes the very specific job of lowering that single penalty number as much as possible over the training data. And because of that, this choice will quite literally define the entire model's personality and how it works. The most common loss function for XGBoost is logistic loss or log loss, which heavily punishes wrong predictions that the model was confident about while rewarding correct predictions. From this loss function, XGBoost creates a baseline prediction in its simplest possible stance before it has earned the right to use feature-based structure. This baseline matters because it sets the starting point for the entire boosting process, so every future tree is not making a prediction from scratch, but rather a correction relative to this initial model. Once the baseline is set, XGBoost looks at every training example in the data and computes how the loss would change if that example were to be sludged slightly up or down. And this quantity is called the gradient. This is the key signal that turns mistakes into actionable instructions, because it does not merely say that this or that example was mispredicted. Instead, it tells you in which direction a prediction should move and how urgently it should move if you want the loss to drop. The model then strengthens that signal by also computing second-order information, which means it goes beyond primary information like the slope of the loss, but also looks at the curvature of the loss right at the moment where the model is currently sitting. If you're a math person, this is where differential calculus gets involved. Essentially, the instantaneous curvature tells us how fast the slope of the loss is changing at that given moment, and therefore how forgiving the situation is based on the loss. If the curvature is high, that means the model reacts very sharply to any changes in the prediction. So any big changes in predictions can actually do more harm than good, so the algorithm treats that region as sensitive. If the curvature is low, that means the slope is changing slowly, so you can move the prediction more without having any consequential effects. This helps the algorithm make progress faster without oscillating. In other words, this key gradient figure itself tells the model what direction and urgency the change should have, while the second order term tells us how much trust to put into that correction and how big the step should be so the update is as efficient as possible. The next decision is how to convert all of these incoming signals into an actual model, and that's where decision trees come in. The model builds a decision tree whose purpose is to group together examples that are asking for similar corrective movement. There might be an entire branch whose predictions need to be increased and vice versa. Then the model can apply one consistent correction to all examples that end up in the same leaf. Now, to make this happen, every potential split that the model is exploring inside the tree is scored with a gain calculation that estimates how much it would reduce the loss. The model then compares that gain to an explicit penalty number and keeps the split only if the improvement is large enough to justify adding another branch. And this process really helps prevent any overfitting in the tree. So once the tree structure itself is chosen, the model chooses a weight for every single leaf in the tree, and this represents how much the model's prediction should change for all examples in that leaf. And these weights, again, are computed from the gradient figure itself and from the second order information. After the tree proposes its corrections, XGBoost scales them by a chosen learning rate, which is simply a control knob that shrinks every step so the model's learning happens in many small steps rather than a few big ones. And this is very necessary because the process of boosting itself is powerful because of incrementing. So this learning rate ensures that no single tree can hijack the full model's behavior. Now, this tree that we've been talking about is finally finished and is added into the ensemble with all the other trees. This means its corrections are summed into the model's existing prediction function. Immediately, the model recomputes all the predictions and the gradient, so the very next tree we work on is trained on the updated pattern of what is still going wrong, rather than just repeating the same work. This entire cycle repeats over and over again, and again, this repetition is not redundant, but cumulative. This is because the early trees that we work on tend to capture larger and more obvious sources of error that affect many examples. but the later trees naturally tend to focus on smaller, more localized examples of error that can only be visible once the big structure is accounted for. This is how XGBoost ends up modeling complex nonlinear relationships and feature interactions. It's important to note that to avoid overfitting and improve stability, the model often injects randomness by using a random bootstrap sample of the data and a random subset of features for every different tree, so they're obviously less correlated with each other. And all of these mechanisms come together to make a layered additive structure where each layer is a correction justified by the loss function and the data. And the final prediction is the cumulative result of many such corrections applied in sequence, which is why XGBoost can be both very accurate and surprisingly stable on messy real-world tabular datasets. And if you'd like to see a full extreme gradient boost model coded out for you in Python, then don't forget to follow so that you don't miss part 2. See you then.